you could start all over again, what would you change?
Oh, I'd probably change more often. You know, I think a lot of criminologists make the mistake of thinking that, oh, well, I built up a particular kind of expertise, so I must stick with that and not venture out onto some new topic. So I think of myself as an interdisciplinary scholar as much or more than as a criminologist. And when I venture out into the study of armed conflict, I see these connections between armed conflict and war. When I venture out into the regulation of the pharmaceutical industry, I have these insights into corporate crime in the pharmaceutical industry. So I think movement is good, but I personally, what I like to do is gradual movement. So that would be an example from studying corporate crime to studying regulation of an industry more broadly, from war crime to studying peace building more broadly, or vice versa, so that one thing leads to a somewhat more broader topic, and then you come back to the narrower topic later in your life. It's not that you leave behind where you started. You come back later, maybe decades later, refreshed by the journey out into a related but different field. So I would change more often if I had to do it again.
Is there anything you wish you knew when you started as a criminologist?
I thought about that question and I've forgotten what my answer was. I think there are a lot of things that I was tossing around in my mind because, you know, there are most of the things that one ultimately learned, one wasn't ready to learn. I mean, what I've just been talking about is an example of that, but you've got to keep changing. I mean, the more intuitive thought would be develop a kind of expertise and stick with it. I think being prepared to be nimble is very important, you know, in a broader sense, that I wasn't well enough prepared to be adaptive and nimble. I wish I had done more of shuttling backwards and forwards between working for an organisation like the Smith family and working as a scholar. For example, I mean, I did a bit of that in my career. I had periods where I worked for government, I had a period where I worked for an NGO, and I had very long periods where I worked in universities as a criminologist. But it's being prepared for the idea of, from the criminological side, moving into practice. There's nothing so practical as a good theory, as Kurt Lewin said. But coming the other way, from practice back to the world of building criminological theory, practice is always ahead of theory. And a lot of the best criminological theory involves engagement with practitioners and formulating in a perhaps a tighter, more sophisticated way, some of the lay theories that are present among practitioners of a particular kind. Yeah.
So branching out.
Yeah. Shuttling backwards and forwards.
And yeah.
I became increasingly, during my career, a believer in shuttling back and forth, but never leaving behind where you shuttled from, to come back to it. So I'm, you know, I've been working the last few years on a big book, which is all about issues that I started thinking about as an undergraduate, but that I never brought to fruition as an undergraduate, as a PhD student, or in the decades in between. But I always kept thinking about them and wanting to do a big book on that. That's a book called Macro Criminology and Freedom, which will be coming out next year.
That's very exciting. I'll be looking out for that.
Yeah, lots of
coming out, so we tell our students to be the first ones to get the book.
Definitely.
We need the first new.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the last one I read was obviously Crime, Shame and Reintegration. So that's going back a few years. So it'll be exciting to read.
It is a long time ago now.
Yeah. What advice would you give to a current criminology student?
I would say a career is a long distance race and not a sprint. There are some things like, as we mentioned earlier, like completing an honours thesis can be a bit of a sprint because that's a very demanding year in a life that you're just coming into now, Corrine. But beyond that, it is a long distance race. Don't feel that you have to sort everything out in a short space of time. Adopt more of a slow food approach to your work. Let your ideas, percolate in your mind and acquire more complexity and nuance over time. I think that's it is about doing things well, step by step, but getting over the feeling that I've got to solve all of these problems in what I write this year. No, you're just putting another brick in the wall, and across a lifetime, you hope that you've laid a lot of bricks that have laid on top of each other to accumulate to something quite worthwhile in a life, whether it's a life as an academic criminologist, largely like me, or a more practitioner life. I think it's true in both arenas.
That's so it's a bit more about the journey than hurrying up to the end.
Yeah, when I was young, we all used to read a book called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, which would talk about climbing a mountain, and the objective is not to get to the peak of the mountain. The objective is to savor the journey of step by step, each little part of climbing a different section of the mountain.
I've got an old favourite of mine called The Alchemist. It's a very small book, but it's a lovely story. I think about the same kind of thing. It's enjoy the journey. But I think that's wonderful advice, because I know in some of my past assignments in my undergrad, I just wanted to suck in as much as I could in the one assignment, and I guess that's probably where I'm going with my thesis. Is I guess we need to take a step back and try and just approach it one step at a time.
One step at a time, but have fun with it.
Yeah.